Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, hiding your Steely Dan records to make younger musicians think that you're cool, or else a scrappy upstart, prominently displaying your Steely Dan records to impress the old heads, this is your show. Because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the second Friday of February 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Emil, who for some reason drove a Chevy Astro that was only painted with body shop primer, and who was always trying to sell you Juul vape pods that he claimed were laced with ketamine. And old Emil would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. Everything that you need for a professional website is already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates. You can sell your music and merch commission-free. There's social media integrations. There's mailing list tools. It's a wonderful product. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Just use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, every single Sunday night, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. It's a live stream. I'm live every Sunday. I'm playing tunes. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a little community over there, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head over to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First of all, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon, you search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and you're not going to miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make a huge difference for me. So thanks for everybody who's already done that. If you're not in a place where you can do that, I totally get it. It's weird times out there with COVID and coronavirus. So you could still help out the show for free two ways. You could either leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or you could simply tell a friend about the show, spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I hope you enjoy this week's chat. My guest this week is the lead singer and songwriter of Lucero, an alt-country and rock band from Memphis that have become something of an American institution over the last 2 decades. Ben Nichols grew up in Arkansas, where he immersed himself in the southern punk rock DIY scene. Lucero formed in the late 90s and quickly developed a reputation as an indefatigable touring outfit around the country. That includes everywhere from nightclubs to the Ryman, from dive bars to Red Rocks. They've recorded for Universal Music Group, ATO Records, and Loose Music. They've appeared on CBS This Morning. They've toured with Flogging Molly, Strand of Oaks, Frank Turner, The Bouncing Souls, Steve Earle, and many others. Rolling Stone has called them Memphis rock lifers. NPR has described their music as the loving, craftsman-like work of the rare kind of band with enough spirit to fill an arena, but with its heart planted firmly in the garage. And Saving Country Music says that their latest effort is in no way complacent, predictable, or formulaic. Lucero turns in a visionary and inventive effort. Their new album, When You Found Me, was just released last week, and Ben and I got a chance recently to catch up on the phone to hear about his journey so far. Ben Nichols of Lucero, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. Obviously, Lucero is a Memphis institution, but if my research is correct, you actually grew up in Arkansas. Is that right?
I did. I was born and raised in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I went to college in Conway, Arkansas, not too far away. So yeah, the first chunk of my life was all Arkansas, and I still consider myself an Arkansan for sure. That's a big part of my identity.
Is there a regional flavor of Arkansas music that people not from the region, wouldn't really know about?
Man, I'm sure there is. Unfortunately, I spent most of those formative years trying to get out of Arkansas, and I wanted to live anywhere but there. And so I was trying to soak up anything I could from anywhere else. But then you get a little bit older, and you start to look back, and then you appreciate the things that you maybe kind of missed when you were earlier, when you were younger. Like when Lucero started, I became very proud of the fact that Johnny Cash was an Arkansan and was born in Arkansas. And I don't know, you kind of go back and you research things like, of course, the band's Brown record was a huge influence on Lucero as well. And so you've got Levon Helm, another Arkansan who is a brilliant musician. And so you go back and you realize that you were really missing out on some stuff earlier on by not giving Arkansas its due. I don't know if there's necessarily a particular sound of Arkansas,
yeah.
but it was still a big influence on me just for the fact that, I don't know, we were kind of isolated. And so going to shows in high school and college, most of those shows were just very DIY type things that kids from Little Rock were just kind of putting together on their own with their own bands or inviting, out of town bands that they knew to come through. But the way that it happened was very, I don't know, it was just kind of incubated, and very do it yourself. And,
yeah.
I don't know, that had a big influence on me as well, just, in how to be a musician. I kind of learned that in that Little Rock scene of the early 90s.
So were there like national punk bands coming through and touring through Little Rock at that time? If so, who were they?
There were. Yeah, there were. Little Rock was we liked all the Discord bands from DC for sure. Everybody loved Fugazi, of course. And they played at Vino's, which is the little place at 7th and Chester in Little Rock where I actually played my first show when I was 14. The club had changed names a couple of times, but yeah, Lucero got our kind of start in Little Rock there as well. But there was the big band in Little Rock was a band called Trusty. And they were the big punk rock band. That was my first punk rock show that I ever saw. And they actually ended up moving to DC and ended up working their way onto Discord.
Oh, wow.
And so they put an album. I know they put out at least one album on Discord. But there were a ton of Little Rock bands, punk rock bands, and those were kind of my heroes and my idols when I was growing up. And Trusty was kind of the biggest one of those. But yeah, you had like Little Rock ended up being just kind of by force of just will. The guys that kind of I don't know, the guys that were in bands, they seemed to know people all across the country, and they were able to get a whole lot of really good bands to come to Little Rock. And thank goodness, because I had no idea what was going on. And so my education was kind of brought to me, by these touring bands.
Do you remember
spot down on the river?
Do you remember a formative show where you saw a band play and you said, I'm going to do that, to hell with everything else? Was there ever kind of an epiphany like that?
Man, there kind of a number of those kind of snowballed and built on top of each other. That first show I ever saw, the Trusty show, at the Women's City Club, they rented it out, this space downtown where they had cotillions and stuff, but the punk rockers rented it out for one night. And there's a young band called the Numbskulls, and I think a band from Texas, and then Trusty. And that, I'd never seen anything like that before, and didn't think anything like that happened in Arkansas. You know, I'd seen TV and random stuff, but there was no internet. There was no Googling your favorite bands, or I don't know. It was just so hard to get information back in those days. And so seeing this in my hometown, it kind of knocked my socks off. And I was like, oh yeah, I think I could do something like this. I'd always liked rock and roll just from a very young age. Listening to my dad's kind of 50s, 45s, the Buddy Holly and the Chuck Berry and all that stuff that's what got my attention. But then seeing a band like Trusty at the Women's City Club, then I was like, wait, there's kids my age doing this, and they're kind of doing it on their own. And I knew there were big concerts and stuff. I'd seen I saw Huey Lewis and the News at the stadium there in Little Rock, but seeing this on such a small level, and such an intimate kind of thing, I was like, I want to get in a van and I want to travel around, and that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
So, that was definitely a formative moment. Yeah,
it's funny you said there, at that time, because I can definitely remember this time too, when it was hard to get information on bands that were any smaller than Nirvana. You know what I mean? And,
right.
And I think in some ways it's great now that the internet exists and everything is ubiquitous. Like that, in some ways, is good. But you're making me think that in some ways something was lost there, because there develops around bands that you can't get a lot of information on, a huge amount of mystique that I don't even know that it would be possible to purvey that.
You've got to try really hard to build that kind of mystique now. You've got to be very intentional, I think, if you're going to, I don't know, do something like that. Maybe like the first thing that springs to mind, like Orville Peck, who's amazing and huge, just blowing up. But yeah, the Mask and that kind of, I don't know, creating that mystique, a little bit of a throwback to that in a way. But yeah, it's got to be done in a different way now. Back then, it was all mystique, just because we had no choice. Like you had to, that's when you'd go to the record store and you try to, find a copy of an old zine that maybe had, a person's list of the favorite bands from whatever other scenes across the country, or whatever 7 inches came out recently. And, your Maximum Rock and Roll is kind of the biggest punk rock one, but it seemed like every town had, back then, there were tons of kids just putting out zines, and that was kind of the underground internet of the day in a way. And, it's kind of odd how important that all actually was. And the fact that kind of stuff, that kind of, photocopied, handmade zines, could actually support, scenes and actually spread the word. And actually, it's kind of amazing that it all actually worked as well as it did back then.
It probably all worked as well as it did because at that age, everyone just needs like $10 per day to survive. So
yeah, you could live a lot cheaper. Yeah, when gas was 50 cents a gallon,
yeah,
and that's something I thought about a lot recently. Just I don't know how bands, especially this year in 2020, if you're a band just starting out, how do you? Yeah, I mean, obviously you're not playing live shows,
right.
so you just have to put it on hold for a little while. But a 2020, if that would have happened to Lucero in those formative years in 2004 or 5, that probably would have been the end of the band.
Yeah.
It could just wreck you. So yeah, in the old days, touring was we lived pretty cheap, and that's how we stayed on the road. But yeah, that seems to be getting more and more difficult as well.
Yeah, and with 2020, I mean, I know guys in like pretty dang established bands that pretty much anyone would know the name of, and
Right.
there's musicians in those bands that are back on the job site right now because it's been 9 damn months, no pay.
Exactly, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
We've been able to float by on credit mainly.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of outstanding bills. Our manager is very nice, not
Right.
demanding his commissions right now, things like that. So we're floating by, but we're going to come out of it with a lot of debt,
Yeah.
and there's just no telling how quickly, even if once we do go back to playing live shows, you just don't know, if people will be coming out to live shows. You don't know what those live shows are going to be like when they do start happening. And, I just remember when the lockdown first happened, and I was like, all right, we can cancel 2 weeks of shows, 2 months of shows. Yeah, we can survive that. And I was like, man, if it gets into the fall, we're going to be in trouble. And now we're into 2021 almost, and it's kind of no end in sight. So we'll see. We're optimistic about the vaccines, and hopefully things can get turned around. But I think it's going to be kind of a long haul back to anywhere close to normal. I don't know. We're just playing it by ear.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear though you guys are still chugging along. That's a good thing. Take me back to some more halcyon days, though. Days that were presumably less depressing than 2020. So you're a teenager. You're seeing these bands come through Arkansas. Your attention is peaked. Talk to me about the formation. You had a band before Lucero, correct?
I did. I had in the early 90s there, I had a band in Little Rock called Red 40, which is a food coloring, because we were drinking some, I think it was OK soda that came out at the time, and we were drinking that, and it had Red 40 in it, and we're like, that'll work. So not the most, we were kids. I was a kid for sure. A couple of guys from other bands, I kind of convinced them to be in my band. The drummer I let play guitar, and the guitarist I let play drums. So they switched instruments just for fun, but they were actually pretty good they were really good actually, even switched on the instruments. And that was Red 40. And we just played around Arkansas, and we played Memphis a couple of times. That was kind of my first real experiences in Memphis, was Red 40, playing shows there. And we'd played a show in Arkansas with a Memphis band called Superstar that wasn't around for real long. But by playing that one show, when we finally did make it to Memphis, all of a sudden there's 100 kids there, and 100 kids was huge. That was we'd made it. We were rock stars. And so Memphis made a big impression on me right off the bat, just because our demo tape had kind of made its way over there, and they had a really pretty tight kind of scene in Memphis as well. There wasn't a lot of crossover between Little Rock and Memphis. Memphis was much more hardcore, and Little Rock was more melodic, I guess, if for lack of a better word. But there were a lot of folks that came out to see us in Memphis, and so that's actually, I met a girl in Memphis, and that's kind of what led me to moving there, actually.
What are your memories of the city itself at that time, besides just the scene? Like, what sort of impression did Memphis, the city, make on you at that time?
Man, it was it was funny. You drive around town, and both sides of my family, my mom's side and my dad's side, are from Altimer, Arkansas, which is this kind of small delta town in southeastern Arkansas. Just cotton fields and soybean fields. And, not exactly a rich part of the state. And Memphis, it's funny. It kind of reminded me of Altimer times a million, but certain parts of town almost looked like they were, I don't know, you could be 50 miles outside of the city, but there's chickens running around and there's little garden plots. And, I don't know, it was the biggest rural metropolis I'd ever seen. But it's still, so it was a city, and, but it still was very southern and very rural in its own way to me. But yeah, downtown Memphis was pretty cool at the time. There was a lot of little bars and little venues, and I don't know. I was a big fan of the Jim Jarmusch movie Mystery Train, and so I don't know. And I was a big fan of, like I said, I grew up on my dad's old rock and roll, all the kind of 50s era rock and rolls, the Jerry Lee Lewis and the Elvis and the Johnny Cash, and so that rockabilly thing and the garage rock stuff, all that was very, I don't know. I just thought it was super cool. And there was a band called the Oblivions at the time, and they did very kind of grungy, dirty garage rock. And I just thought they were the most rock and roll, awesomest, coolest thing I'd ever seen. And it was very, very Memphis to me. And so those early days, I really enjoyed soaking up that just kind of Memphis rock and roll kind of vibe. Yes. It was the right place at the right time for me. And so yeah, then I set about trying to find guys to be in a band with, and that actually took quite a bit longer than I thought. It took a few years to find guys that would commit to being in a band.
Why do you think it took so long?
All the people all the good musicians were already in bands. Everybody, and the good musicians were in 4 or 5 bands sometimes. So there were musicians there, but at least in this kind of younger scene that I was in, everybody already had their things going, and I was kind of a newcomer trying to find folks, but it took a little bit. So I ended up with my guitar player, Brian Venable, who I knew he was at all the shows, but he wasn't in any bands. He'd never been in a band before. But he kind of decided he wanted to be in a band, and that was as close as I could get to finding a musician to play with me. It was like, bam, you're it. You're the guitar player. Let's go. And so that's kind of how it started.
And how did you guys get it off the ground? It's so many bands get formed. We've all seen a million bands get formed and then kind of very quickly fall under their own weight. It's hard to get a band just off the ground the first 2 inches. How did Lucero get off the ground those first 2 inches?
I think we were real lucky that Memphis was kind of this, I don't know. It wasn't like it was Seattle in the grunge days or anything. It wasn't like it was a nationally known scene, but it seemed like everybody was in a band. It seemed like there were 20 bands, probably, maybe more. And there were a whole bunch of little places to play. So it was just kind of this thriving community of music existed. And if you have something like that, it does make it easier to get started. With Brian not knowing how to play guitar, and me, I played bass in Red 40. I didn't really know how to play guitar either. So the two of us barely made one halfway competent guitar player. And so we kept everything really simple. And I remember in the early days, it was like, all right, Brian, you put your fingers here, here, and here, and you just do those 3 notes over and over. And there were songs that's how they went. So we started very, very basic. And our first show, we played 6 songs. And then after that, we found a drummer and a bass player for a little bit. And then we found a new drummer and a bass player after those guys quit. But that was all the first 6 months, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And then really it kind of solidified in that it's been the same 4 kind of core members ever since, which that kind of boggles my mind that we've been the same 4 guys in the band for 22 years now, something like that.
That's really hard to do. How do you do that? I mean, that's like having 4 different marriages all rolled into one and negotiating all of the politics. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a whole different thing. That's it is a lot of compromise, and it's I don't know. Part of Lucero is like once the 4 of us kind of found each other. I don't know. There weren't really a whole lot of other options. And so I don't know. I mean, obviously you could quit the band and just work a job, or if you wanted to just stay on the road all the time, then you had to compromise, I guess. And I think the first little bit is fine because you're getting to know each other. And then after a year or 2, you get to really know each other, and then, resentments start to form, and living just on top of each other is tough in a van, and then we shared a house for a number of years. So things can get kind of rough. But then after a little bit of that, after that stage, you kind of learn when not to talk, and you learn when to just back off and give everybody their space. And this guy might be saying something that you don't agree with, but you pick your battles, and you learn what battles you have to fight to make the music you want to make and to get the van down the road to the next show. And then you know when to just shut up and back off, and you know what battles aren't gonna get you anywhere, and they're just gonna bog you down. And actually, I got to give credit to all 4 members of the band. Everybody got better and better as the years went by. It just kind of, I don't know, focusing more on playing and trying to give the other band members as much leeway and space as possible. Which is tough to do in a Dodge van, but if you can figure out how to give each other space, then that helps keep you going, I think.
It is, man. That's so tough. I mean, I've been on a million of those tours where you're in the van. If you have hotel rooms, you're splitting it with one another. And
exactly. You're always with somebody.
Yeah. And it's just like you get on stage that night and you can't, get over the fact that you had to shower after them and there was a bunch of hair in the shower. And
it was disgusting.
Yes.
It's absolutely disgusting. Yes. It's hard. It's definitely hard to separate that. And that's another one of the Lucero kind of pitfalls is, booze can make you forget about those little things, and at least for a little bit, and can kind of smooth out some of those rough edges. But then, too much booze, and it's all rough edges, yes. and you're right back to fighting again. And so, we were, I don't know, we weren't doing anything different than anybody else. We were pretty much the typical dumbass American rock and roll band that was just drinking too much, driving a van across the country, trying to play good music and maybe succeeding every now and again. But we were definitely just figuring it out. And I really think now, maybe after 15 to 20 years, we're finally starting to do it more correctly. I think we're actually playing better now than we ever played before. Maybe just because we're getting older and we just don't have the stamina to live that way anymore.
It's tough to keep up. So, I had a bass player for years who used to say that we were living in a sitcom called Booze Van. And it was just like, on this episode of Booze Van, the guys get in the van and go find more booze.
It's that was I mean, in your 20s and your 30s, even now, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
There's bands that do it differently, and they're usually more successful. and there's another path you can take, but that was kind of the path. I don't know. For me, that was the path that was the most fun at the time. And I'm ashamed of some stuff I did in the past. A lot of it I don't remember. There were definitely some rough patches, but I also had a whole lot of fun and made a whole lot of friends. and got to make some records that I actually still don't hate to this day. And we play the songs, even if I don't necessarily like the way the records sound right now. I still like the songs themselves, and I like playing them. So for all the rough spots, I still appreciate the whole thing very much. I'm still feel very lucky to be here.
It's a pretty cool gig for your 20s and 30s. You come back. I've just realized recently, I'll have friends now text me and be like, "Hey, I'm going to Kansas City. Where's the place to eat there?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I have a job where I know the dive bar in Kansas City. I know the diner. I have friends there that I can like. That's a pretty cool perk of the job."
It's great. And it's a real nice feeling when you're on the road and you pull into town that might be, 1,000, 2,000 miles from your home, but you can walk into the bar and the bartender and the folks that work there, and everybody is happy to see you. And it's like walking into Cheers, but you're not at home. You're far away from home, and having your own, little spots all across the country. Yeah, it's great. It's like you said, it's definitely one of the perks. And so yeah, it was nice having your little home away from home in every town you go to.
Especially those first 10 or 15 years, Lucero was had such a renown for being road warriors, always on the road. I mean, you just said yourself, like, well, you can stay home and work a real job, or you can just come be on the road all the time. I want to talk to you about like the good side. You've talked about, the downsides of it. There's some occupational hazards with booze and stuff like that. But the upside of it, can you remember when it first started working, where you guys would go around and say, oh, man, we're going on tour and we're actually making a little bit of dough. People seem to be buying the records. Like, can you remember a particular time or a particular show when you felt like, oh man, this crazy idea just might work?
Man, it's tough to nail that down. Because we did it in such kind of small incremental stages. But like, we were a band for a couple of years before we bought a van. And buying the van itself was like a big step. That was like, okay, this is the tool that we need to really go forward. Because like I said, Memphis had a bazillion bands, but not a whole lot of them got in a van and left town and went on the road. So that was a big step for us. As far as growing a crowd, man, yeah, the first 5 years of being on the road. So that would be the band's 7 years old by this time. That first 5 years, it's rough pulling up to the bar, maybe where the bartender doesn't know you and the promoter doesn't know you, and you don't know anybody, and you don't know if there's going to be anybody at the show at all. That feeling of rolling the dice every night, and you're like, all right, tonight we might just be playing to the bartender, and that's definitely, it can be a little disheartening. And a little scary. Although it can turn out great if the bartender, even though nobody paid to get in, the bartender loves you and keeps feeding you shots. and then maybe the next time you go back, the bartender's called a few of his buddies, and they come out, and then you've got, 10 or 15 people there. And then it can start to build. But I would say it took at least 5 years on the road, if not a little bit more, before we didn't have to worry about that. You knew there would always be somebody there. But the first 5 to 7 years, you stood a chance of there being absolutely no one. Yeah. And so when that kind of went away, which I don't know, might have been 2006 or 7, when you're like, oh wait, it's been quite a while since we played to absolutely nobody. You're like, okay, maybe this is working now. And in those early 2000s, that's when, I was the only one with a driver's license for a lot of that time.
Oh, no.
So I was the only driver. The van was the only vehicle we had. John, my bass player, had vehicles, but they would kind of come and go. But Roy didn't drive. Brian didn't drive. And so we all lived together in this kind of crappy warehouse space. Nobody had car payments. Our rent was $600 a month for everybody. And it was a disgusting place to live, but it was only $600 a month. So we did it. We were bare bones for quite a while. And so those early years, yeah, you get in the van and you're either living together in the van or you're living together at home, and you got no bills to pay hardly. And so yeah, we were able to do it for longer than anybody in their right mind, unless anybody in their right mind would have quit earlier maybe. But I don't know. Like I said, we had nothing better to do, and I think we were having fun. But yeah, we lived real cheap. But yeah, it was nice when it finally turned around, and then the guys could move out and get their own apartments, or move in with their own girlfriends, or whatever it was.
Right.
Maybe go take a driver's license test, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It took us a while to grow up.
But once you did grab a crowd, you had a cup of coffee with a major label for a while, for a record or two. Can you describe how that whole process went? Because you guys were so independent, and after that, you've been very independent DIY spirit. And then in the middle there, you signed with Universal. How did that go for you guys? Do you feel like you got anything out of it? Would you do it again?
Man, I'm not the funny part is, actually, I think what I realized is that it's really, in certain ways, it's not very different from being on any label. Small labels and big labels act exactly the same. It's just big labels maybe have different resources, and sometimes different agendas. But a band like us doesn't really factor into anybody's agenda. If a band like us is involved with a major label, it's just because a particular person there took an interest. And so it's that old kind of cliche, like, if your A&R guy gets fired, then you're screwed. Nobody else at the label is going to care for you. And that's kind of true. But other than that, the small labels are kind of playing the same game as the big guys. So it wasn't very different as far as signing the contract and the terms of the contract. We never signed any kind of deal where, we always kept final cut, to use a filmmaking term, I guess. Like, we were never forced to work with a producer we didn't want to work with, or forced to try a different sound, or so we never had those kind of experiences with a label. And like I said, we weren't really high on anybody's agenda. But there were some folks that happened to work for major labels that, I don't know, that were maybe fans of ours. And so we gave it a shot, and it wasn't terrible. It wasn't great. It was just kind of like, it was like everything else we'd done. And I think maybe maybe the stakes were a little higher with a major label. If you don't take off right off the bat, then they're not necessarily interested in fostering a career sometimes.
Right.
And so, yeah, smaller labels might be better for that kind of thing. And now we've got a distribution deal with 30 Tigers for the new record, and we did the same thing for Among the Ghosts. And that's been a pretty cool way to work, where there's not really a label involved at all. The band kind of functions as its own label, but you get a lot of help from 30 Tigers as a distributor, who also helps you cover some of the stuff a label would traditionally do. They can help with promo and setting stuff up like podcast interviews and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's kind of a nice balance now. It's I think we've kind of, hopefully we can continue down this road for a while. It's a nice way of working.
This week's episode is brought to you by Nation of Heat Records and my new album, The Diving Sun, to be released on March 19th, 2021. Let's take a listen to the first single, Crescent Bridge. What began as a search for songs for a B-sides album morphed into an obsessive remix and morphed again into a proper album process. This new album features songs from sessions from my album Windfall and from The Flooding Color, and also a handful of songs written and recorded during the COVID quarantine. The result is an album that's unlike any other I've ever produced, but which also stands shoulder to shoulder with any album I've ever released.
It drives a dark car, no heart, rebel with a gold card. I'm here waiting on the Crescent Bridge, and she's a true bride, bright side, parliaments and brown eyes. I'm here waiting on the Crescent Bridge.
That's entitled Crescent Bridge from the forthcoming album, The Diving Sun. Go to joepugmusic.com to hear it in its entirety. Fatherhood has obviously changed Ben's outlook on life, as it does for every parent. And it also sounds like it's changed how he approaches his job, putting things in perspective. That's also common for parents, I think. But there's one aspect of being a parent that's a bit different for musicians, and that is reconnecting with a simpler, more vivid view of life through the eyes of a young child that can really transfer into your art. Spending all day with a 2-year-old has a way of making you notice all of the little miraculous details that life has to offer. Details that have often been overlooked and taken for granted many years running. Perhaps that's why psychologist Carl Jung once said that modern people can't see God because they won't look low enough. There's a wonderful poem by Louise Gluck that describes that same special insight that we have as children to take the world in. It's entitled Nostos. There was an apple tree in the yard. This would have been 40 years ago, behind only meadows. Drifts of crocus in the damp grass. I stood at the window, late April. Spring flowers in the neighbor's yard. How many times, really, did the tree flower on my birthday? The exact day, not before, not after. Substitution of the immutable for the shifting, the evolving. Substitution of the image for relentless earth. What do I know of this place? The role of the tree for decades taken by a bonsai, voices rising from the tennis courts, fields. Smell of the tall grass new cut, as one expects of a lyric poet. We look at the world once in childhood. The rest is memory. Talk to me a little bit about this new record that you made, and specifically where you made it. You guys made it at Sam Phillips recording, and you made it with a guy. I made my last record with Matt Ross Spang. I love the man. I think he's great.
Yeah, he's great, isn't he?
And awesome. So talk to me, how did you get involved with that studio? And you've worked with Matt before, maybe, am I correct there?
We did.
Okay.
Yeah, we did. We've known Matt for a long time, especially Rick Steff, my piano player. He's known Matt since I think Matt was 15 or 16.
Oh, wow.
And when Matt was 15 or 16, he got a job at Sun Studios, like giving tours and stuff there in Memphis, which obviously Sun was Sam Phillips' original studio there on Union Avenue. But then he went from giving tours to he was so just knowledgeable at such a young age about antique gear and period correct gear that would have been in Philips or in Sun Studios back when. And he kind of took it upon himself to reconstruct and really kind of, he became the kind of technical expert there at Sun when he was in high school, and was recording bands, after hours, after the tours were done. And he just taught himself so much. He was just kind of born to do this, and he's always had a passion for it. And so then, after that, he ended up moving over to Sam Phillips Recording Service, which has never been a tourist destination. They don't do tours like they do at Sun. It's always been a studio. And the head engineer there was a guy named Roland James, who was, I believe he was Jerry Lee Lewis's guitar player forever. But he worked for Sam and did engineering over at Phillips Recording Service. And so Matt worked with him for a while. And then when he passed away, Matt kind of took over his head engineer spot at Phillips. And with his background at Sun and just knowing gear in and out, he was the perfect guy for the job. And he's like Sam Phillips built that recording service building from the ground up. And I'm pretty sure Sun Studios, the original place, it might have been a garage at one point in time before it was a studio. And I want to say most of the studios in Memphis were built as something else, whether it was a church or whether it was an office building or whatever. But Sam Phillips Recording Service was built as a studio by this kind of mad genius, mad scientist, Sam Phillips, who was obsessed with sound. And so you've got weird reverb chambers built into the walls. The lobby is constructed in a way to be used for other kinds of sounds. You've got that little cavern reverb chamber at the end of the hallway. And just Matt Rossbang's the kind of guy who knows how to use all that stuff and kind of can relate to what Sam Phillips was actually thinking when he built this place. So Matt Rossbang, a Memphis kid, and a special kind of guy, and somebody who's great to know if you're in a band and want to record some music. He's a cool guy.
Yeah, and how do you think that changed the sound on this record? How was this record different than ones that you've done in the past, or any album that you've done with Matt? How is it different than albums you'd worked on in the past?
Right. Man, he, I guess Rick's, like I said before, Rick's known him forever just because Matt would have a session at Sun or Phillips, maybe somebody from out of town wanting to record, and he would call Rick in to play piano. When, other guys come in and be the backing band. And so Rick had worked with him a whole lot and knew exactly what kind of engineer he was. And so when we went in with Matt, it was just very comfortable. In the past, we'd worked with different guys from out of town, and we learned a whole lot. We'd done a couple of records with a guy named Ted Hutt, who was very hands-on in his production style, from the songwriting to, lyrics, and really getting in there, like, maybe try the verse as the chorus, and then you take the bridge and you make that the verse, and then you write me a new bridge, and like really, really getting deep in there. And we learned a lot from him, but it was very intense and a little stressful. And he was out of town, so he'd come into town maybe into Memphis, and we'd have 3 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever it was, and there was a very strict deadline. With Matt being a Memphis guy, with Rick having known him forever, with us being more familiar with him, it was very laid back. And like you said, you worked with Matt Rossbang. He's got a very easygoing kind of presence and style. And then just the I don't know, not tricks necessarily, but the knowledge that he brought as far as just getting good sounds and experimenting with sounds and trying to get stuff down to tape. He's got such a, I don't know, easy way about him that you don't really even notice what he's doing necessarily.
I was going to say the same thing. It's like, I would compare it to, like, if you go to a dentist and you're really worried about something that they're going to do to your
Right.
mouth that's going to hurt, and they're just talking to you, and then you realize that the thing is already done, and they're such a professional. I remember I hate getting sounds in the studio. It's so soul killing to me, and
It can be.
it can be. Yeah, I'm not saying it is all the time, but for me it is a lot. And working with him, I just found like I thought we were having a conversation, but really I had just been strumming my guitar a little bit and talking into a mic, and then he was like, "Okay, well you can play the song now. We're good to go." And I was like,
Yeah, he's
"What?"
like, we're good to go. Exactly. I was like, don't we have to do this for another hour just
Right.
to get it dialed in? And then you've got to plug something else in and then something else. I was like, no, we're good to go. Just go. Or we did. And that's what we did for Among the Ghosts, which is the previous record. We just went in and set up, and I didn't have a lot of demos. I didn't have anything really. I just had some guitar parts, and we just kind of started playing. And he started just kind of grabbing stuff. And for Among the Ghosts, we recorded in a completely different way than we'd ever done it before, where we'd go in for a week and set up and just kind of bash stuff out. And then we'd go on tour for a couple months. And then we'd come back and maybe go in for another 3 days or 4 days, whatever we could afford. And then go on tour for a couple months and then come back. And we did that for pretty much a whole year, where we were just kind of in and out of the studio. But with Matt, just being there at Sun, in our hometown, it made it really easy. And just, he's become a good friend. And so getting into the studio and out of the studio he made it super easy on us and so convenient. And, it was about the most laid back way to write a record ever. And we'd go on tour for a little bit, and then we'd come back and he'd be like, all right, look, I put this together and I put this together. And I was surprised that sometimes there would be songs there that I didn't even realize. I was like, holy moly, that part actually does make a song. That's great. And then I would work from there. And, that process was something different for us, but it was what we needed after, such kind of intense, stressful records that we'd done recently. Getting to just relax and really experiment and just kind of throw stuff around. It was a luxury that we really enjoyed. And I don't know, with this record, with the newest record, it was somewhere in between. We had less time, and we were more focused for sure. And we were working from demos that I'd spent more time with, but you still had Matt Rossbang and Sam Phillips. And so it was a nice kind of balance. It was somewhere in between the older records and Among the Ghosts.
It's really nice
Matt makes everything easy.
It's really nice to have that in your backyard, because there's nothing worse than getting off tour and then having to tell your wife or your girlfriend, you're like, well, I'm going into the studio now, but it's 1,100 miles away, so I'll see you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough sell. And yeah, it's like, well, we're not on tour, but
it's going to be the same thing to you,
Right, exactly.
So
that is one of the things about Memphis that is pretty cool. Lucero couldn't exist as Lucero without Memphis. It's from the early scene that I was talking about to these studios and these kind of older guys that you just run into that you wouldn't necessarily find other places. Your Jim Dickinsons and your Sam Phillips and your Roland James and your Matt Rossbang even. That really shaped who Lucero is for sure.
That's rad. Do you think that maybe these last two records were easier for you to make because not only because of the vibe that you had with Matt in the studio and because you were at home, but also because in records that you did before that, you learned a bunch of skills and now you're better and more confident as a writer in a way?
Definitely. That 1372 Overton Park was kind of a mid-career record for us. And that was the first one we did with Ted Hutt. And up until then, anybody that was a producer that we'd worked with had been pretty hands-off. Mm-hmm. It was pretty much just there to make sure we didn't burn down anything, but pretty much just let us do what we did and make the record that we were going to make no matter what. But like I said, with Ted, it was like a workshop. It was like, and not just with the songwriting, but also with the guitar playing and the drumming and the bass tones and the everything. He was just very detail oriented and had a very clear idea of what he wanted and what he had in mind, which is just, it was so far away from anything we'd done in the past. It was very alien to us, but it was excellent to kind of, we'd already made 5 records or whatever, and we'd kind of been just drinking ourselves to death, and we were kind of in not a rut necessarily, but it had been a while since we'd made our last record. And I don't know, things were kind of, the gears were kind of grinding a little bit, and not everything was working as smoothly as it should have. And so this kind of shock therapy that we had with Ted, it was painful in certain ways, but it was necessary, I think, to kind of jolt the band into realizing, oh, wait, we can actually push ourselves a little bit harder and aim a little bit higher and maybe hit this mark that we hadn't in the past. And so, as difficult as it was, I actually had a whole lot of fun getting into the nitty gritty of making an album with Ted. And we did 3 records with him, and each one kind of became easier and easier as we went along, because we knew more what to expect from him, and he knew what to expect from us. Yeah. But we learned so much, and so I don't know. I guess the moral of that story, I guess, is that even if somebody isn't as laid back or easygoing as your Matt Ross Bangs of the world, there's still a lot to gain from that. And in fact, the fact that relationship was so kind of intense, that was really the only way to get us to grow a little bit as a band. So I'm real appreciative to Ted Hutt, and I really like those records. I wish my voice would have been in better shape on some of those. He did the best he could with what he had, but like I said, we had kind of, especially me myself, I'd kind of run myself into the ground pretty hard after the first 10 years of the band. And now the voice has kind of come back. I've gotten a little bit healthier, not completely healthy, but a little bit healthier. And, yeah, Ted did a great job with the band that he had to work with at the time. And he definitely made us into a better band. As a songwriter,
What are some technical things that you took away from those processes? Like, how is your songwriting different now than it was before going through that?
A bridge is important, apparently. And before that, maybe you'd have a bridge in a song, maybe not. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you can just play the verse again and put a guitar solo on it, and that's the bridge. I would get a little lazy, I think. And sometimes it's cool to have a song that's just one part, and the vocals change just a little bit, and that's your chorus, and it repeats 3 times, and that's it.
Right.
And that can be really cool. Or you've got 2 verses and a big outro, and that's all. And that's cool, and it can be really cool. And still, some of my favorite songs are built like that. But he kind of would at least insist on us. He's like, fine, I see what you're doing, but just try. Write me another part for that song, and see what happens. And the bridge is a great spot to lyrically say something you haven't yet said in the verse and the chorus.
Yes.
Like there's always more that can be said. And possibly in a slightly different way, a different perspective. Is there some way to put a twist on the lyrics for the bridge? He's like, you're kind of passing up a good opportunity with the bridge. And so he just kind of forced me to work a little bit harder and not be complacent, and really push songs into directions that I might not have followed before. And yeah, you can discover some really cool stuff and really fun stuff. And so yeah, that was kind of one of the biggest things I took away from that experience.
These days, when you have a chance to write and you're not you're not having to chase a 4-year-old around the house, and you actually got some time to sit down and be creative. What does your writing process look like? Do you start in the morning? Do you have a room that you do it in? Do you do it with a guitar? What does it look like?
I've got a little office in the basement that it looks like a teenager's room from 1976, kind of. It's like the room that I wanted to have as a kid, but never was allowed to have.
Yeah.
So I got a little drum set and a little PA and, a little keyboard, and got everything I need. And so I do spend a lot of time down here when I can. But the funny part is, I'll lock myself in here sometimes and get absolutely nothing done. It's when I'm in charge of Izzy, because her mom works a real job and has actual adult responsibilities. And so a lot of times it's just me and Izzy while mom's working. And I wrote a whole lot of songs just with a guitar on, but then chasing her around, and like I'll get to, look out the window and play a few chords and hum a melody, and then Izzy needs me to whatever, look for a different cartoon on Netflix, or come help her get whatever stuck to whatever, and and then I'm back and I've got a few moments to kind of bang out some chords on a guitar, and stuff kind of just ruminates throughout the day as I'm hanging out with Izzy. And I actually wrote some really cool stuff that way, where I'm only halfway paying attention to the songwriting, and the other half of me is, my attention's with the little girl. And I think there's some kind of I think I've come to appreciate the subconscious element of songwriting. Sometimes when you're focused too hard on it, when you are isolated and you're completely by yourself and you've got no interruptions, it's just dead silence and you and a guitar or a keyboard or whatever it is. And sometimes that's the hardest environment to write in, at least for me. It's necessary sometimes, especially for finishing a song.
Yes.
For actually tweaking those lyrics and getting the actual lyrics for real solidified. Yeah, you need peace and quiet for that. But for the inspiration, the start of the songs, I don't know. I never tried writing a song with hanging out with a 4-year-old before, or a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old, but it worked out a little bit. And your subconscious is kind of free to stumble across certain things, and at least then you've got some stuff to work with when you do have some peace and quiet. So it was kind of a 2-part process: the craziness with the subconscious, kind of accidents. What do you call it? The kind of serendipity stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you take that and you actually do find a quiet moment, and then you really kind of polish the stuff.
Man,
that's how it's gone the past couple records. That's how it worked.
I've had a super similar experience having kids, and it reminds me of before I did this for a living, and I'd be working during the day. I was a carpenter for a while, and I'd work during the day, and then I'd go play music at night, and that's how I'd write songs then. Like, I wouldn't want to be framing a wall, but I had to frame the wall to pay for my rent, but I'd be writing in my head, and it made the writing, once you actually had time to sit down, you were looking forward to it instead of like dreading. When you actually have time later on in life, and it's just you and a guitar for 8 hours in a room, you kind of start to dread it. But then
it becomes work, and that's never fun. But the funny part is the times that you feel most like writing are when you're not allowed to.
Right.
But that gets the juices flowing, and that gets your ideas kind of going. I'm the same with kind of long drives. In the old days, I drove back and forth from Little Rock to Memphis over and over, and that's about a 2.5 hour drive. Mm-hmm. And I was doing that drive, I don't know, 3 or 4 times a week sometimes, just back and forth. Wow. And I wrote a whole lot of stuff and listened to a whole lot of music. I actually write a lot of lyrics, again, subconsciously. Like, I'll be listening to a favorite song of mine, or a new song from, a local kid. And those lyrics will inspire, my own thoughts and my own lyrics. And I found that you can actually write lyrics while listening to other songs, and you're not ripping them off necessarily, but you're kind of taking this thought and then working from it. And so driving in a car, just listening to music, or just, thinking about the songs you're working on. yeah, that was always a good time for me, to let ideas kind of percolate. And I don't drive around as much as I used to. Now it's replaced with a toddler.
What are you talking about, man? I pack them in the car all the time and just drive for an hour if it's getting too much
That's
in the house.
No, Izzy's not going to stand for that.
Okay, fair
Although
enough.
she was really good. We've done some long trips with her, and she's traveled a whole lot for a 4-year-old. She's been all over the place and been to a lot of shows already. And so she kind of understands what Dad does, and she likes traveling. She's got that kind of bug already.
Oh, look out.
Yeah. She, I don't know if she likes to sing. She'll make me play drums, and she'll sing into the microphone. But if I don't play drums right, she'll come and correct me.
Yeah.
But so we'll see. I don't know if she'll be a musician, but she definitely likes the traveling part for sure. But but as far as just randomly driving, I don't know. She's like, Dad, what are we doing? Where are we going?
Well, you know you're going to be in trouble when you find on her browser history the white panel vans when she's 12 years old and she's dreaming for that. You're like, oh no, dearie.
Oh God, yeah, exactly. We'll see. I don't know. I'm not sure. I figure I'll encourage her to do whatever she wants, of course. But
yeah.
I'm sorry. I just turned my speaker on there. Yeah, that's a problem I've still got a little time. That's down the road. I'll deal with that down the road.
Well, man, I want to thank you so much for being a part of the show. This is great talking to you and hearing about your journey so far. Thank you, Ben.
Man, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Okay, brother. Take it easy.
All right. Bye-bye.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Lucero's latest album is entitled When You Found Me. It's out in the world right now everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.